Delta CX, available for CX and UX consulting, projects, and training. Contact us for a free consultation.
Hey everybody, it's Debbie Levitt from Delta CX. Welcome to exciting episode 43. Today is Monday, May 25th, 2020. It's 6 p.m. Italy time, which means I'm ready to go to sleep. But there's been sun out, so I've got a little bit of color here that I'm working on. And I'm very excited today that we've got Dr. Seth Finkle joining us. But before I show you his lovely face, please remember to subscribe and ring the bell over on the YouTube channel. If you're watching on LinkedIn, get your butt over to YouTube. The stream is honestly better and much faster. And of course, as always, if you're watching this live, I will be checking for comments and questions both in the LinkedIn chat and in the YouTube chat. So if you have something to say it. Swear words are allowed. Okay, so on that note, I am going to turn on Dr. Seth's microphone and cut over to him and say, Seth, except I've got my name on it. Let's fix this. Seth, introduce yourself, because this week you're not me. Who the heck are you?
I am not you this week, but most weeks I am. So I am Dr. Seth Finkle. I'm a clinical and school psychologist living in Pennsylvania in the US of A. And I'm Debbie Levitt. I'm happy to be back on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm always happy to have you. There's an endless amount of topics you and I could cover for better or for worse. So today we wanted to talk about narcissism, narcissists at work. I've had so many conversations with people recently and doing some mentoring, and people were like, I just had this coworker or this boss, and no matter what I did, I couldn't make them happy. They were always sabotaging me. There was this, there was that. And I think there's probably more narcissism that people recognize, but obviously it's not always the easiest thing to define. So some people just think like, oh, a narcissist, that's just an egotistical person or a selfish person. But as a psychologist, what is the real definition of a narcissist?
So there's definitely a lot of overlap between someone who's egocentric or self-centered and someone who's narcissistic per se. Narcissism is kind of a tricky beast to try to tag in some significant way, and the reason for that is it kind of means two different things. There's a formal diagnosis in a clinical sense of a narcissistic personality disorder, which is literally just that. It's a disorder of one's personality, and it is a pretty serious mental illness. But narcissism as a personality trait is actually pretty widespread and in fact kind of normal to some extent. It's in all of us to a limited degree. So the main distinction that I would draw, and this is not an absolute, it's not like there's any one way to do it, but someone who's more egocentric or self-centered and not necessarily a full-blown narcissist, think about someone who is maybe focused on themselves, but they're still capable of some empathy. They can still have reciprocal relationships. They might still feel guilty when they do something wrong. They're low tension, but they're still capable of listening to other people. They might show some interest in other people's thoughts or experiences. They just have a hard time sustaining that interest. But for the most part, we're talking about something a lot more subtle. When you're talking about narcissism, these are people who often have a failure of empathy. They don't typically feel remorse or guilt when they're in a kind of narcissistic mode. Relationships are not as reciprocal. They're more transactional. It's about what I can get from you. You're not likely to get a whole lot of genuineness. There's a kind of superficiality to people. They typically think they're not just smart or capable or important, but that they're better and smarter and more important than other people. So there's less self-awareness, less empathy. They might actually look more interested in your thoughts or experiences than someone who's egocentric, but that's because they're able to fake it better. They're hoping that they might be able to get something from you if they make you feel listened to, and so it's a more manipulative kind of, as opposed to a really poor attempt, it's a really heroic attempt, but for very specific purposes.
Okay, so thank you for that. And I
Mhm.
also think I'm going to tell you some of the things I think tend to be traits of a narcissist. And I want to tell a couple of work stories, and I'm not going to name any names because I think if we can tie this into some experiences I had, it'll help people see where they've been dealing with narcissists at work. So, one that I find is they seem to really need to be right. And I
Mhm.
remember one story at a job where I worked, the engineering lead, who I thought was a narcissist, had overruled my designs, overruled my idea, and he thought he had the better idea. So he was going to tell his team to build that, release it, to a test group, and he'll show how great he is. Well, as you might imagine, the test group hated it. It was considered a complete failure. And when the project was handed back to me, I said, "All right, fine. You tried your idea, it failed. Now let's do my idea." And his answer was, "No, make my idea work." And I said, "Your idea didn't work. It just failed in testing." But it was like he wanted to cycle through this endlessly so it could look like his idea worked. Is that narcissistic, or is this just jerky, or both?
Well, I mean, arguably, probably some of each, but absolutely narcissistic, kind of classic. Um, in the world, people have been studying narcissism, by the way, for I would say probably close to maybe 100 years. It's a well established, well known personality trait. Um, and again, I had mentioned kind of everybody has it. Psychologists have long talked about something called healthy narcissism, which is the idea of kind of self confidence or boldness, or the idea of feeling like one is entitled to um, good things in life. And so it's a kind of a weird oxymoron to call that healthy narcissism, but that's been the description forever. But in the general world of research on narcissism right now, it's kind of divided into two sub flavors, if you will. There's the grandiose type, and then there's the more vulnerable or covert type. The grandiose type of narcissist is generally kind of along the lines of the person you're describing, your former coworker. So it's someone who is really just out there about it. They put it right out. Um, they need to have their overall worth and specialness and superiority validated. If they're not feeling like the best in the room, they begin to get very defensive very quickly, and in some cases can engage in some very bad behavior. And we can talk about the impact that can have on the workplace and individuals. Um, and in those cases, sometimes you're getting into what's sometimes colloquially referred to as sort of the raging or the malignant narcissist, the person who is toxic to really to themselves, but also to everyone around them. And they can do an immense amount of damage. But not everybody who is an overt narcissist is toxic. There's actually, and again, we can, just to balance things out, we can talk about the fact that there's a distinction drawn in the literature nowadays between bright features and dark features of narcissism.
What's
That
the
there's
bright
actually some,
ones?
well, so that's the thing. Narcissism is, if you look at it again from this notion of it being a kind of spectrum of boldness between bold and confident on the one side, and so you can have visionary leaders who are very strong and very strong-willed and really kind of impose themselves on a company in a pretty significant way, and they often do rise to the top. They rise to leadership pretty quickly because they've got these features that are actually very appealing or attractive, and in some cases beneficial. But the dark features come with the package, and in some ways they can actually undo all of the good stuff that the bright features hold. So
Well,
the covert
can I be
narcissist,
bold and confident and whatever without being a narcissist? Like, it's not automatic that
oh,
every
sure,
bold person is a narcissist.
sure, right. And again, we're talking about a trait or a characteristic, and so it's by the time you describe someone as being a narcissist, right? If we're going to be semantic about it, by the time you use that term to describe or encapsulate their personality, you're probably talking about someone who's the real deal, someone who's really got enough of this as a quantity that it's going to be potentially pretty damaging. There's lots of CEOs out who aren't necessarily people you would describe as a narcissist, as their primary defining feature, but they're strong-willed and they feel really confident and they really are into their own idea and are narcissistic. It's just not necessarily toxic or harmful.
Okay, I want to jump into another story from my work past. I have found that some narcissists I dealt with imagined that everybody agreed with them, even if other people were disagreeing with them, or even if people were being neutral and hadn't really taken a stance. That when I worked with that guy I mentioned, our team actually needed an intervention because of some of the things that he had caused. And when they got all of us together with this like mediator of some sort, he starts telling these stories that everybody had agreed with his idea and nobody had agreed with my idea. And I said, hey, if we're at the point where we need an intervention, we're going to have to tell the truth about this situation. You had your idea, I had my idea, and nobody on the team wanted to deal with either of us. Like there wasn't the whole world versus Debbie.
Right.
But they want you to think
Right.
that.
Exactly. Well, they want everyone to think that because that's the manipulation that's used as a way of kind of defending themselves. Because at the core of all of this, the theory has always been that narcissists are actually, and again, we talked about that there's the grandiose type. There's also the vulnerable type, the covert type. These are people you won't necessarily pick out of a lineup as being narcissistic, but they have the same core feature, which is that they're fragile, that they don't feel super confident about themselves. In fact, quite the opposite. And even this is true of the grandiose narcissist, that there's this kind of inner core of doubt and vulnerability and weakness that they need to protect themselves against. And the way they do it, arguably, is not to sound like a psychologist, but this is the idea, is that they'll protect themselves by constructing a reality around them in this very defensive, brittle way. And you can totally see the cracks in it. It's not logical or sensible. It's a distorted way of viewing the world in order to be able to kind of protect this really thin shell or veneer of armor that they've got against this feeling of being a complete failure. And you can see it break through. Like if someone is no longer narcissistic, oftentimes they become deeply depressed. Because they no longer have this sense of it's sort of a black and white thing. I'm either the very best or I'm the very worst. And if I can't be the very best, I'll, number one, fight like hell to keep that image going for myself. They want to believe it more than they want you to believe it. But if that fails, then oftentimes they'll go into a pretty dark level of depression as a result.
Hmm. And that reminds me, what you were saying just before this reminds me of a note I had made because I wrote down a bunch of traits I think narcissists have just to see if you agreed or could think of more. And one of the ones that I wrote down was, if all else fails, revise history. They might
Oh, sure.
claim they never said something we actually have a record of them saying, or I never sent an email that said that and it's in the email. They might demand you prove something, and sometimes it's something you can't prove, like the way you feel. I feel this. Oh yeah, prove it. They seem to live in this world of revisionist history and gaslighting, and it's so
Hmm.
hard for people to sometimes recognize that that's being done to them because obviously the whole point of that is for you to question your own reality, question your own sanity. How can we do better at recognizing when someone is pulling revisionist history or gaslighting at us on us?
Well, I think for the most part, it's about knowing yourself. We all have the tendency to kind of doubt ourselves in some capacity. Some people, if you don't, you're probably narcissistic, right? So the whole idea is that your average person is going to engage in some level of self-doubt. The narcissist, by doing this, is engaging in this really kind of elegant strategy that they're probably not even totally aware that they're doing. We're imposing that same level of self-doubt that they experience in themselves all the time and are constantly fighting against on you, on me. So that kind of manipulation, those sort of mind games that happen when they start to feel defensive, they just externalize it. And in some cases, legitimately externalize it. That they're narcissists are the first people to accuse people of being narcissists out loud. Like you never have the opportunity to use that word with them because they're probably already going to use it against you before you even have the opportunity.
That's like, I forgot the name of
So
that effect, but it's where people try to end an argument by invoking Hitler, like, and then nothing comes after that.
right, exactly, right. That this is sort of the other N word, right? This is the word that people will use to try to shut someone down. I'm not a narcissist. You're a narcissist. That kind of projection is kind of classic. It feels very immature. It feels very 3 or 4 years old, and that's not coincidental. That's sort of where they're at. That's about how vulnerable they are, and so yeah, they're gonna flip the script on you and make you think, am I the crazy one here? And so to your question of how do we avoid getting sucked into the gaslight, I think that's how. I think you just have to know yourself and not personalize their behavior. Once you can identify someone as being a narcissist, they're not your friend. They may be your coworker, your colleague, your superior, your subordinate, but they're not going to be someone that you can trust, someone that you can share your vulnerabilities with or open up to. They're someone who is an individual to be reckoned with on some level. And yeah, you have to document, you have to cover your tracks, you have to take good
Paper
notes,
trail.
you have to save your emails, you have to do all the things you need to do to protect yourself because this person is now a potential threat as much as they're a potential ally.
Yeah, let me jump in on a couple of things there. And we have a question in the chat room as well. So, oh man, I have so many stories running through my head. I can't pick one first. Yeah, the paper trail is so important, and I tend to keep quite a paper trail. And I can think of an example at work with a product manager narcissist who had done a number of things through lying, which is another great hallmark, though lots of people lie, but this is like on a special scale. And I had documented all of this. And then when we ended up in a meeting, I lost my cool at her. And I don't lose my cool a lot, but I lost my cool at her. And I didn't swear at her, but I called her an unpleasant name. And she went and reported to my manager that I'd called her this name. My manager took me into a room. Did you call so and so this name? And I said, I did. I'm sorry. I lost my cool. It was completely wrong. It was not like me, but here's what she's been doing. And I pulled out all the stuff, and he was like, what? Like, she's been doing what? Oh my God. Okay, don't say that again. Don't ever say that again to anybody. I gotta go handle this. And like, he stormed off to go deal with her, but only because I could prove that that was what was going on. And that's what drove me to lose my cool, even though it still wasn't okay that I lost my cool. So I want to read a couple of things from the chat room to you, and because there is a question in here. Darren's
Mm-hmm.
joined us today. He's one of my favorite people. He said, I once worked with someone who was getting a PhD in psychology and, unethically, of course, used their knowledge of psychology to manipulate how the team operated. Main tool, gaslighting. When the person found out that I had declined to pursue the team lead, I was immediately viewed as a threat and treated accordingly. And Darren asked if you can think of some examples, and I'll try two, of gaslighting in the workplace.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Take it.
Um, so yeah, that's it's funny. You know, you had asked me earlier. I'll try to do two things at once here. You had asked earlier about characteristics of the narcissist, and that you had some, and you're looking to see if our lists match up. So I would say that the key things to look for when you're trying to identify a narcissist would be someone who's either kind of a know-it-all or really grandiose. They need to have either their sense of intelligence or just overall value and specialness and superiority validated. Those are sort of the clear hallmark kinds of features. But I would argue they're not the most dangerous. The most dangerous features are that they can be extremely seductive. They'll manipulate using false admiration to make you feel good about yourself sometimes. Um, they'll be vindictive if they feel like you turned on them. they'll defensively kind of target you. They'll become vengeful and petty and backstabbing and trash talking. And again, this kind of idea of being revisionist, it's all about sort of manipulating the information to try to hurt other people. And then there's just this notion of people being a workplace bully. They can be brutal. They can be mocking and undercutting and contemptuous and blaming and really kind of make life difficult. They can create a very hostile work environment. So to the question at hand, examples of gaslighting, I think any time you've got someone who is trying to use this as and it sounds like this is kind of the example that's on the table, someone who's trying to use it to try to make someone else seem less effective or less competent or less skilled in some way, you're going to start spreading misinformation about that person. You'll start talking to, water cooler talk, or talking kind of in a little aside to superiors or things like that, in a way that can reduce that person's credibility, or going to try to raise some doubt as to whether or not they're really the best person for a leadership position or for any particular responsibility.
Darren says they mobilize others against you.
Exactly. So before you know it, there's a group of people saying, and you might be lucky in a workplace, a person, a close colleague or two, who'll come over to you and say, hey, I don't know if you know this, but people are saying this about you. I've worked in those settings as well. I think we all, if you've been in the workplace for more than 10 minutes, we've all been in a situation where someone has tried to do kind of the mean girls technique, and just start talking trash in a way that can be very skillful and really do some serious damage. And it changes the way reality looks. And then you have to start asking yourself, if you're a decent person, you're going to ask yourself, well, am I good at this? Should I be doing this? And are the rumors partly based on reality? That's when it becomes gaslighting, when you start to really question yourself, even though you know it's false.
And Shannon says, recognizing gaslighting and narcissism comes with experience. She thinks that, I think it's she, sorry, that junior team members can be especially affected by things like gaslighting. So it can affect the juniors more because they're worse at recognizing it.
Absolutely. There's a great sort of mantra that people have talked about for years, and it's been in workplace environments forever. The idea that, if you're not special like I am, then I'm free to treat you like crap. And so the phrase is, kiss up and kick down. So anyone who's above me, I have to try to, try to smooth talk and impress them with what an obsequious sycophant I am. Whereas anyone who's below me, they're just worthy of contempt and blame. And so that's the way it goes. The idea of crap flowing downhill. Anyone below me is going to get it. It's the people above me who I have to continue to work to try to impress, because the more I can associate with those people, don't forget to subscribe. The more I can associate myself with those people, the cooler I am.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that for a moment. Plus, we have more questions in the chat already. You know how popular you are when you show up, Seth. One of my notes was, I noticed that narcissists tend to surround themselves with people who just come off as fairly weak people. They usually don't want to support strong people. They don't want to promote strong people. Sometimes they don't want to hire strong people. They tend to hire weak personalities. They sometimes hire poor workers, people who don't even do their jobs, because those people are malleable. They will support the narcissist, or they admire the narcissist, or they're happy to just take orders. A narcissist does not want to be surrounded by critical thinkers and change agents, even if their PowerPoint slide says they do.
Can't add anything to that that would improve on it. That's absolutely true.
Well, thank you. All right, then let's get to another question. So, good friend Oz asks, do these people actually sit and plot this stuff, or is it an unconscious way of being and just how they see the world? I'm going to
That's a
go
great
with both.
question. Both is the right answer, but not
Okay.
always at the same time. It's often one or the other, and it's situational. But for the most part, I think it's also somewhat of a character style. There are some people who tend to be more methodical about everything, and some people whose personalities tend to be a little more impulsive. And people who are narcissistic are often impulsive, so there's going to be lots of these moments, even if they're a very sort of planful person, where they're going to betray themselves, and these behaviors are just going to come out. And at some point or another in this discussion, we should probably talk about how to spot these people before they get hired. And that's one of the tricks in being able to do smart recruiting, is recognizing that narcissists can't really hide from being narcissists. Um, that there's always going to be a certain level of unconscious tendency to just do this stuff, and they really can't stop themselves. So, but do people planfully generate a system of gaslighting that is like this complex manipulative scheme? Sure, they can, but they don't always. Sometimes it's just opportunistic. It's just what happened in the moment, and they won't even know they did it.
And we've got more comments here. And now I'm trying to get LinkedIn to work. So, Randy, for some reason, your comment didn't show up in my other system, but he says, great topic. Just thinking about it gives me shortness of breath and tension, but it must be covered. Everyone getting into the UX field needs to heed this warning and be prepared. Randy recently did a talk, and he spoke of ego, where he spoke on UX, and this more extreme form of it is something to watch out for. He said it's not manager specific, but he asked the audience a survey question. My manager knows what is best for the user, to see if people would agree or disagree. Ugh. And
Mm,
Andre says, did you encounter a narcissist that uses assertiveness as a justification for being this way? I guess they're like, I'm not a narcissist, I'm just assertive.
sure, yeah. That sounds. Um, have you ever encountered? I've encountered people who often will say things like, "I'm just being honest." Um,
Mm.
that honesty is being used as the idea of brutal honesty that's being used as a weapon.
You need to,
Um,
you know what? I had a narcissist, I had a battle with a narcissist recently on the friend side of my life. And when he had given me some feedback on something I didn't really want feedback on. And I just said, okay, we just have different opinions on this, and that's fine. Thanks for your opinion. And he spent a really long time trying to convince me how important his opinion was, and how peer reviews are important, and I should be listening to his reviews and ideas. And it was just like, all of a sudden I got a lecture on how I need to listen to other people's advice. Now I forgot what you were talking about. I'm so sorry.
oh, I'll help you. So we're
Where
talking
was I
about
going?
honesty, brutal honesty, just
Oh
being
yeah.
honest.
Right. Yeah. So it was like, well, this is the way I see what you've done, and I'm just being honest, and it's the way other people would see it too. So he tried the whole gang thing. Quickly, Louis writes, talented senior UX professional with weak personality seeks 100,000 pounds a year with narcissistic boss, properly psychologically broken in current job, but willing to at least get paid for it.
There you go. Well,
Louis
yeah,
wins the
the
comedy
idea of
award.
having, that's right. The idea of having that yes person who's gonna, as you had pointed out, the idea of someone who's kind of the weak-willed, you know, partner in crime, where they will never see them as that, the weak-willed subordinate who they can make do their bidding. Um, they'll often seek them out in relationships as well, in personal relationships. So
There's always an
they have
enabler.
this. They're right. So there's this chronic need for validation and the need to control other people, and this failure of empathy. And what's astonishing to me, as a person who doesn't see myself as particularly narcissistic, and if anything, might be one of those yes people sometimes. Um, I hope not at this point in my life, but have been before. Um,
Say you
those
are. No,
characteristics.
I'm kidding.
those characteristics in the narcissist are the very characteristics that help them rise up through the ranks in the workplace. They make them noble partners, but they make them very, very appealing. People love to hire and promote these folks because they don't typically come off immediately as hostile and arrogant and defensive. They come off as confident and strong, and the people who can get stuff done. And so, yeah, that idea of assertiveness, you can very easily see a scenario where someone's going to say, I'm not a narcissist. I know what's best right now, and I'm just trying to assert what I feel is going to be best for this company, when in fact that may be truly how they see it, but in reality sometimes it's much more toxic than that.
Oh, I know. I can't believe we're halfway over already. So
Yeah.
I know more characteristics and approaches will pop up as we go. But once we start to figure out that we might be dealing with a narcissist, is there anything that we can do at our workplace? Do any tactics work with a narcissist? Like, what do we do other than monster paper trail and try to protect ourselves with a lot of documentation?
Well, let's say for starters, those are really important. Those may be the most important options. Other than, for example, if it's someone that you're really kind of shackled to, and you can't kind of address it effectively by going up the chain of command and trying to get someone to kind of, you described someone who immediately says, "I'm going to handle this right now." There are workplaces, obviously, that doesn't happen, where they're not going to protect the individual. They're going to reward and promote and protect the narcissist. And in that scenario, honestly, the smartest thing you can possibly do, if you can, is get the hell out. That's not always feasible, but if you can, those work environments are sufficiently toxic to work in that they're not likely to change. I mean, not to be overly pessimistic about it, but it's in the best interest of the narcissist to maintain that system. If the system deems it in their best interest to maintain the narcissist as well, you really need to step away. But there are things you can do. So the interesting thing is that narcissists tend to be fairly rigid and fairly predictable, and to some extent, you can engage in some benign counter manipulation, if you will, to try to level the playing field a little bit. If you do stick around, it's important to have realistic expectations. It's important to understand that you're not going to be able to change this person. And that's sometimes tempting. You're like, sometimes I see these glimmers of humanity in them. Sometimes they really seem to be listening to me. Maybe I can just, change myself a little bit, and in doing so, I can help them. And that's unfortunately a kind of losing gambit. That's not likely to help. What you can do, protect yourself by not sharing your vulnerabilities or weaknesses with them. That's an important one. They will
It goes
at
back
some
to
point.
don't trust them. You can't trust them.
Exactly. The expectation is that those things will be used to demean you or to kind of manipulate, or it's a kind of a blackmail scenario. So best not to engage in trust, but engage with them politely and respectfully, but maintain basic boundaries. You can be assertive without being aggressive. You don't actually want to make them feel attacked, because if you do, they're likely to engage in some pre-defensive retribution. They're likely to attempt to engage a very aggressive response that's going to target you as an individual, because now you've become a threat, and a very personal threat. And so at that point, you have to be prepared. You are going to get the full brunt of what they've got. So anything that they perceive as criticism is going to potentially put you in that scenario. So there are things that you can do, kind of clever way wording feedback or criticism feel as critical. So for example, you can tell them, one thing that's commonly used is a kind of sandwich technique of feedback. So you'll start with something very positive. I've noticed you've done your numbers are great. You've been doing a tremendous job. You've been turning around these projects like gangbusters. Um, I'm wondering if maybe, and then you can throw in this sort of little mini
This is the
criticism
middle
thing.
of the sandwich.
Right. It seems like sometimes some of your colleagues have some ideas that might actually benefit the project, and it would be really great to pull some of that into what you're doing. I think it would really enrich some of what you're bringing to the table. And then again, you sort of finish the sandwich with, but we're so glad that we've got you as a strong leader in this organization, and you can kind of model by listening to other people as a way of being. So
And I
you're
know
kind
a
of
strong
feeding your.
leader would want to enrich others by making sure their ideas were included.
Exactly. Right.
And
So you're
scene!
right. So you're using flattery to reduce their insecurity. You're reducing their likely resistance to it by talking early on about how it might benefit them personally. Um, it doesn't make sense to try to change them. Instead, it makes sense to try to either game the system a little bit with them and try to improve the way you're interacting with them so that you're going to be more effective. And that's going to feel sleazy at times. It's going to feel manipulative because it is. And if you're not into being manipulative, that may or may not be your cup of tea, but it can be very effective.
I always
Um,
say UX practitioners have to be manipulative, but only use it for good.
right. Well, exactly. And frankly, psychologists too. So, again, to the comment in your comment section, psychologists are manipulative in the same way that attorneys are manipulative and UX people are manipulative and doctors trying to get you to change your health behaviors are manipulative. Manipulative isn't necessarily bad if your intent is positive and if you're able to do it in a way that actually has some benefit to the individual. But unfortunately, if you're doing it to bolster your own sense of importance, it's not going to go well for anybody.
Yeah, so I know we've got probably more things that you can do at work, but we've got a couple of comments from Oz. And first, he said, his second comment first. His second comment was, I hate that sandwich thing. As soon as it starts, I know something's coming. Just say it. Don't dance me around. I get suspicious of people who use that. And I said, and that's how I know you're not a narcissist, Oz.
Exactly.
Narcissists love this stuff. Because previously,
Yep.
Oz had asked, it's easy to look at someone else. What if I'm the narcissist? What if I'm the source of trouble? How does a person maintain sober self awareness? That's a great question from Oz. Psychologist Dr. Seth Finkle, how do you have the self awareness to know you're the narcissist? The fact
Wow.
that you want to know makes you not the narcissist.
That's often the case. Yeah, if you're asking the question, you're probably not the narcissist. I would agree with you. I mean, it may literally be that simple. If you're open to criticism, if you're open to the possibility that you are being narcissistic, by definition, you're probably not narcissistic. Um, these are folks who are sufficiently rigid and critical of others, but they can dish it out, but they can't take it. So that if someone has to actually ask themselves, "Am I a narcissist?" You're probably not. It's often the people who are convinced that they're not, and rigidly so. And in fact, if anything, um, they they have to be the one who's right. They have to be the one. They're sore losers. They have to be the one who's not just correct, but the best. Um, and oftentimes, they are going to be people who disparage everyone else around them as being less good in order to be able to build themselves up. If you don't find yourself engaging in those behaviors and you're not receiving that feedback from those around you, I don't know that you necessarily have to lose a lot of sleep over it.
And Darren says, I think of manipulation of getting someone to do something against their will while being persuasive is providing people with information in an ethical manner so they can make a decision, in short, limited to 200 characters.
I like that. Um, I would counter and say there are times when you can have, again, kind of a white hat manipulation. where I would agree with you that persuasion would be the better option if you can. It's the more honest, sort of more genuine way to do it. And for most of us who are not super manipulative people, it feels better. For people who tend to be more competitive, tend to be more interested in winning rather than everybody kind of winning. And these are not necessarily signs that you're narcissistic. These are just personality traits. There are lots of uber competitive people with very strong egos who aren't necessarily narcissistic, but they like to play to win. And in those scenarios, they may engage in manipulation to get what it is that they want out of the situation. There are other times where you're manipulating someone because they're resistant and you're them. But you still think it's important to them and to others around them that something change. Is that arrogant? Is it manipulative? Probably. But it's also sometimes the only way to survive when you're dealing with someone who's got a pretty serious personality flaw.
We've got some comments in LinkedIn, which is sadly way more asynchronous than YouTube, so they're a few minutes behind us. So Randy said, I just can't be a brown noser. Sometimes you need to push the eject button. I've got a great comment from Louie, but before I say it, I want to remind people, first of all, we're live, so keep those questions and comments coming. Second of all, Seth is a wonderful recurring guest on the show, and in the next, we've got 20 more minutes with him, if he'll be so kind. Tell us, while we're here live and can think about it, what are some other topics that you would like to see Seth to return to talk about, knowing that he is a fully qualified psychologist and all-around funny guy? So what do you want to hear us talk about? So Louis says, hold on, Louis wrote something and now it's scrolled up here for me. Louis says about before, when you're talking about something in the past. He said, good technique. It feels better than my usual sociopath icebreaker. Are you bipolar too? And then he said, but on a serious note, I generally repeat what the narcissist said and explain in my words what they want me to do and why without saying whether or not I think it's a good idea. I parrot it back, but try to explain why so they think I get them.
Right. So how you talk with a narcissist is really important. For example, this is another sort of nuance of this. Narcissists tend to be serious smack talkers, and you may not be the one who's being targeted at the moment. It may be the other guy. It may be the other person who's working on something, and they're constantly disparaging someone else or blaming them for something that obviously was their own shortcoming. And you want to confront it, but you don't necessarily want to be the target of their criticism. And so one way of being able to kind of shut that down pretty effectively is to bring them back to the task at hand. So I'm not sure it's necessarily helping us to, kind of complete this thing we're working on. Let's focus on, and so basically you're kind of refocusing on let's do this thing that we're actually getting paid to do, and sort of stay here and now, and asking, is this if the information that you're bringing to the table right now going to help us to complete this task? And if you do it in a way that stays calm, you can potentially do it in a way that doesn't come off as overtly hostile or critical or defensive. It's a dangerous gambit, but it's one that can be fairly effective to just remind them, we're doing this thing right now, and kind of distract them from their own tirade. And that can sometimes be pretty helpful, especially when you're the person who's being blamed. And that can be very uncomfortable when they're just, if it weren't for, and they start kind of replaying old stuff in this revision and make you feel like they're attacking you, because they are, to kind of refocus them back on, I'm not sure how this relates to the thing that we're doing right now. And so kind of bringing things back in a team fashion or a duo fashion to this project we're working on right this minute.
Thank you. We've got a few more notes here. So Jessica says, managing narcissists, not manipulating. I recently had a conversation with someone where we were talking about the narcissists in the families in which we grew up, so not work narcissists. And I said, yeah, you can never win against a narcissist. If you're against them, that's more fuel for their fire. If you're for them, they're still going to find a way to hate you and cut you down. And the other person said, well, I managed my father for 50 years. And I said, you managed him, but you never won. And I want to remind
Right.
people that narcissists can give you that feeling of, wow, I just can't seem to win. No matter how I treat this person or what I try, it just doesn't seem to make things better. That would be one way to see this could be a narcissist.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you're not going to, right? You're absolutely correct. You can't win. Um, that's actually the mere fact that you aren't going to win um, is one of the reasons why it's really important to recognize these folks before you end up going down the
Thinking it's
rabbit hole
you.
with them.
Yeah.
Right. Whether you're in a personal relationship or whether you're in a work scenario where you're looking to potentially bring someone into the team and the team has to decide, should we hire this candidate? Those are the times really before you end up saying I do, or before you commit to cohabitating and buying that house together, having that child, or hiring that candidate. That's the time to be able to kind of determine, hey, you know what's going on here? This person is a narcissist. Spotting them early on is vital, because once you're handcuffed to them, it's real hard to get out.
Yeah, very true. Randy had a really great comment. He said, companies and HR need to do a better job of looking out for how employees are affected by narcissists. Employees can't do this all on their own without support. And I said, so true, Randy. If we were hiring for values, you'd think we would look for bad personality types. And he said, I think it would be good if he, I assume that means you, Seth, addressed the implications of mental health caused by toxic work situations, though that could possibly be its own topic.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, absolutely. It's the costs in terms of fiscal cost, and in terms of personnel, and in
Mental
terms
health.
of right, mental health, organizational morale. They're legion, and there's tons of research to support this at this point. Interestingly enough, there's a high correlation in lots of recent research between narcissistic leaders in an organization and that leader feeling like they're doing a good job. Um, Whether or not they actually do a good job is a whole other story. But when you promote these folks, unfortunately, it tends to just pour gasoline on the fire. Um, so yeah, there's the damage they can do is enormous. Um, there's often a kind of arrogance that follows the feeling above the law. So there's a tendency in a very logistical sense, a very real world sense, of doing damage by damaging the integrity of the company, getting into trouble for failure to follow regulations or procedures or policies, um, sexual misconduct. These are hugely common kinds of scenarios that go along the lines of a narcissistic leader. But sure, the damage that can be done, I think, is incalculable, because frankly, we just won't know. A lot of people are just simply going to leave the company, and you won't be able to really track it. But I think it's pretty intuitive to say at this point, the harm that can be done to people. We know that just bullying can have huge impact on kids and adolescents and adults, and this is essentially a form of bullying that we're talking about. It's led to it's led to serious mental health difficulties, up to and including suicide. So it is something to be taken very seriously, and HR has a huge responsibility for this. It is not something that individual employees can really take on or handle themselves.
Yeah, I had an exit interview at a company. I was quitting because of my boss's boss, and he started setting me up to fail and doing some wacky things, and I could see what was coming, and so I had given notice. And the HR person, I said, "What? How long is an exit interview normally?" And she was like, "Oh, 20 minutes or so." I said, "Book 2 hours." And she was
Mm-hmm.
like, What?" I was like, "Do it." And of course, I went through the entire story of my time there. I pulled up old emails because she was like, "Oh, I was just told you should be put on a performance review program." And I said, "Yeah, funny thing. Let me tell you a little bit about that." So I pulled up all these emails proving that nobody could tell me what my work was for like weeks. But then they were reporting to HR that I wasn't doing a good job. But I had all these emails saying where I would say, "Okay, what do you want me to work on?" They'd be like, "We don't know." And so I started showing her all these emails and I said, "And I'm quitting because of these two guys." I said, "And I've done a little digging, and evidently I'm the eighth person in the department to quit for the same reason." I said, "How much longer will you let this go on?" Because
Mhm.
I said, "At this point, you know I'm not a fluke. You know I'm not making this up. You know I'm not a complainer. I am the eighth person to sit here and tell you about these two guys." And she goes, "I can't breach anyone's confidence, but I'll just say your story sounds familiar." And I found that those two guys were gone within 5 months after that. So
Mhm.
HR was late to that one, and they didn't care and act fast enough, but they eventually did something. Jessica wants to know, Dr. Seth, can you think of any effective approaches to asking a narcissist for more money or a promotion? "O
Yes,
most magnificent and merciful majesty, master of the
exactly.
universe." Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you give them what they want, there's a reasonable chance that if they have the capacity to do that, sure, um, they probably would. If you equate them giving you a share of their wealth, of their largesse, of their generosity, and exactly as you're parodying, Debbie. I mean, that's the thing.
That was
You're
an
going to
old
get
Monty Python sketch.
you get much further that way, right? If you are willing to take a boot, chances are pretty good you can probably get something for that. The question is it worth your soul? Um,
What if I have a
but
soul and
but
I
you,
can't do that? And I just want the promotion or the more money. How do you ask the narcissist?
I think you could ask pretty much the way you would ask anybody else. But I think if you can do it in a way that incorporates a certain amount of flattery, um, I think that's going to be very helpful. Something that makes it clear that this promotion or this raise is going to potentially benefit them in some way. It's also really nice if you can make it their idea. But that's a really manipulative tactic and one that I wouldn't necessarily try to play because that's hard to kind of construct and it can backfire. I
Right.
honestly think the way you do it is you're straightforward. These are the traits that I have, but you do it in a way that doesn't necessarily set off their competitive streak. You're not trying to be better than them. You're not trying to kind of rub their nose in the fact that you deserve praise and attention. You're doing it in a way that maintains the focus on them being the all-powerful, lord of the workplace, and you have been learning from them, right? You're trying to do a little bit of what they're doing, and you're learning so much at the feet of the master. And again, I think the more you can engage in those kinds of overt flattery and yeah, it's you're more likely to be able to get a positive outcome from what you're looking for. But again, you may pay the price for it down the road.
Yeah, tough. And Randy says take some anti-nausea medicine if you're going to start flattering a narcissist.
Yes.
Oz has a great point, and we should definitely spend a little time on this. Randy's question, Oz says, reminds me that we're talking about mental stuff. Can you speak to being careful not to play amateur psychologist? Oz is okay reporting a bully, but he probably shouldn't be diagnosing a narcissist.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
So
um,
what's the right language to use at our workplace with our manager or with HR? We don't want to say, "Hey, Joe's a narcissist." Well, what are some better words that we can use so we are not playing psychologist and maybe speaking more to the experiences or the symptoms?
right. So I think it's less about finding a label and more about describing behaviors. Even in my clinical work, I don't typically use the word because I don't find it to be super helpful. As an idea, as a construct, as something we can talk about, it's a helpful kind of bookmarked tool to talk about something. It's a um, kind of a handy shorthand for something. But for the most part, I don't find it to be super useful because, as we're talking about, there's a lot of different flavors and traits and characteristics to narcissism. Anytime you use a single term to try to reduce something to that word, I think you lose a lot in the translation. So I wouldn't attempt that kind of reductionistic diagnostic thinking. It's really about, what are they doing? What are the behaviors that they're engaging in that you can pretty much any time you're going to be reporting bad behavior in the workplace, you want to do it in this fashion. You want to do it in a way that isn't labeling someone. It's just describing what they're doing. And the more matter of fact you can be, as though you're filling out, you maybe are filling out a complaint form or an incident report or something like that. It's a just the facts kind of scenario. What did they do? What didn't they do? What did they say? When was it said? I think those are the things you want to report. You don't want to talk about this person is a toxic narcissist, because that's essentially just name calling at that point.
Right.
It's not engaging in anything constructive.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Oz gives you the thumbs up. That's the beauty of being in YouTube. It's like almost synchronous. It's beautiful. Thank you, people. Which reminds me, would you people please subscribe on YouTube? It is a much better place to be hanging out with us here, despite where I've put my graphic. Guys, we only have a few more minutes left with Seth. Please give us any last comments or questions you have. And if you have ideas on what we could talk about in a future episode that's in that psychology realm, or jazz piano realm, or whatever Seth knows about, please let us know what you would like to hear about. Let's see. Oh, Swetha is here and she says, I had an interview with a narcissist and I received a full-blown critique of my portfolio, and not in a good way. This individual proceeded to tell me how he designed, how long he designed for, and I'm giving you this feedback for free. It was the strangest interview I ever had. So it sounds like this guy made a job interview of her about his greatness.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that's going to happen on both sides of the job interview. If you're interviewing a narcissist, by the way, they look great on paper. And they typically come across in interviews as confident and capable and bold and visionary and charismatic. So yeah, it's always going to be about them, whether you're the one being interviewed or they're the one being interviewed. As a handy little 60-second tip, as a freebie for anybody who's ever in a situation to try to do, potentially want not to hire someone who's a narcissist, there's a couple easy things you can do. One is make sure you always check their references, because past behavior is absolutely the best predictor of future behavior.
That's tough. Everybody gives the reference that's going to say the good things.
Well, except, as it turns out, a lot of times there's the sense that managers aren't going to do their due diligence and they're not necessarily going to follow up. It's really hard if you're a narcissist to cover your tracks. But having said that, if you want to catch them in the act, they don't like to give other people credit. Ask them to describe an accomplishment made by a team that they were on, and look to see how they take responsibility for everything that happened. Ask them to describe your former employers and job situations, and watch how quickly they start to subtly disparage those people and insist that they had to leave that job because there were no longer any challenges for them there, or something like that. And then one of the classic techniques is a 3-step interview process, where you literally bring them back for multiple interviews. Most of us can handle that process, but if you include, they'll expect to kind of be hired after the first interview because they're dazzling.
They're so good.
By the second interview, if they're being interviewed by at least one peer, it's interesting to see how they'll start to become a little more frustrated. And if you place them in a third interview scenario, a natural subordinate, it is fascinating how quickly they will lose their crap completely, because now they feel insulted and hurt. And
how dare this junior interview me?
Yeah, you'll see their true colors very quickly if you engage in that kind of process.
Yeah, and Darren says, I think you can spot a narcissist in interviews at times by the questions they ask, like things about team dynamics and reflect the well being of the whole. Narcissists tend to avoid this if they're on a trend of focusing on self.
Exactly. They're not likely to ask a lot of questions because they probably don't really want to know. They just want to be able to go on a litany of their wonderful accomplishments. The minute you start asking them about other people's accomplishments or about mistakes that they made, about anything sort of self-critical, you're going to see pretty quickly. And if you mention to them something that you're critiquing on the resume, or you mention some negative comment that you picked up through your reference checking, you can anticipate seeing that crack start to form pretty quickly.
Yes. Guys, we are technically out of time. I can't believe it. That has just flown, flown, flown.
Indeed.
Man, oh man. I guess we're going to have to wrap up. So, a couple of quick closing notes of the show. First of all, as always, please subscribe on YouTube. I don't make any money from this, at least not as of when I'm recording this, but I have a goal of having more subscribers. So please do subscribe. Costs you nothing. Also, I have been live streaming roughly 3 times a week all through May. So please mark your calendars and join me in June. I'm going to change all of the times. Instead of doing some of them at the top of the hour and some of them at 15 past the hour, they're all going to be at half past the hour. There are a zillion people on LinkedIn who are all streaming at 9 a.m. California time, noon East Coast time. I'm just going to slide a little bit later and start at half past so that you can enjoy those people for half of your lunch hour and then switch over to me. So in June, mark your calendars for everything, including office hours, starting at half past. Oh, Wilson, you're too late. You just got here. He said, and then Darren says, awesome. Wilson says, I used to think it was okay for your boss to take credit, but after this, I think I will know my position. So true, Wilson. You deserve credit for your work. Oz says, good stuff. That's high compliments from Oz. So everybody mark your calendars for half past starting in June, but there will be office hours tomorrow at 6:15 my time, Italy time. Adjust. And then a podcast on Wednesday. I've already forgotten what it's about, which I'm sure is going to be a terrible insult to whoever my guest is. Hold on. What am I doing Wednesday? Oh, yeah. Darren, it's you. I'm doing 10 traits every UX practitioner needs. And then sneaky, special, uncredited surprise guest Darren is going to join us and talk a little bit about emotional intelligence. And that'll be it for May. So everybody, thanks so much for joining. Seth, thank you so much for giving us more of your time to do these wacky adventures. I think that the audiences love having you here. Look up Seth's previous podcasts with us. We did empathy. We did imposter syndrome. What else did we do? I'm forgetting. I didn't prepare.
Behavior change.
That's right. Dealing with change, especially as the pandemic hit. So that was like March. So we've done a bunch of them. So just look for him all over the live podcasts playlist on the Delta CX YouTube channel. So I'm going to play us out, everybody. But thanks again. And thanks, Seth. And see everybody soon.
Thanks for watching. Delta CX is available for consulting and projects related to CX and UX strategy, leadership, training, problem finding, problem solving, and innovation. Learn more at deltacx.com.